First technique. Suppose you contemplate something beyond perception, beyond grasping, beyond not being you. Suppose you contemplate something beyond perception, that which cannot be seen, which cannot be perceived. But can you imagine something which cannot be seen? Because imagination is always of that which can be seen. How can you imagine something? How can you suppose something which cannot be perceived? That you can perceive, you can imagine. You cannot even dream something which is not capable of being seen and perceived. That's why even your dreams are shadows of reality. Even your imagination is not pure imagination. Because whatsoever you can imagine, you have known somehow. You can create new combinations, but all the elements of the combination are known and perceived. You can imagine a golden mountain flying in the sky like a cloud. You have not perceived such a thing ever, but you have perceived a cloud. You have perceived a mountain. You have perceived gold. These three elements can be combined. Imagination is not original. It is always a combination of something you have perceived. This technique says, suppose you contemplate something beyond perception. It is impossible. But that's why it is worth doing. Because in the very effort something will happen to you. Not that you will become capable to perceive. If you try to perceive something which cannot be perceived, all perception will be lost. In the very effort, if you try to see something which you have never seen, all that you have ever seen will disappear. And if you persist in the effort, many images will come to you. You have to discard them because you know that I have seen this. This can be perceived. You may not have seen it actually as it is, but even if you can imagine it, it can be perceived. Discard it. Go on discarding. This technique says that persist for that which cannot be perceived. What will happen? If you go on discarding, it is going to be arduous effort, because many images will bubble up. Your mind will supply many images, many dreams, many conceptions will come, many symbols. Your mind will create new combinations. But go on discarding unless something happens which cannot be perceived. What is that? If you go on discarding, nothing will happen to you as an object. Only the screen will be there of the mind, with no image, with no symbol, with no dream on it, no picture on it. In that moment, a metamorphosis happens. When the screen is simply there without any image, you become aware of yourself. You become aware of the perceiver. When there is nothing to be perceived, the whole attention changes. The whole consciousness reflects back. When you have nothing to see, for the first time you become aware of your own self. You start seeing yourself. This sutra says, suppose you contemplate something beyond perception, beyond grasping, beyond not being you, then you happen to yourself. For the first time you will become aware of the one who has been perceiving, who has been grasping, who has been knowing. But this subject is always hidden in objects. You know certain things, but you never know the knower. The knower is lost in knowledge. I see you, then I see someone else, and this procession goes on. From birth to death, I will see this and that, and I will go on seeing and seeing. And the seer, the one who was seeing this procession, is forgotten. It is lost in the crowd. The crowd is of objects, and the subject is lost. This sutra says, if you try to contemplate something beyond perception, beyond grasping, which you cannot grasp by the mind, beyond not being, immediately the mind will say, if there is something which cannot be seen and cannot be grasped, it is not. The mind will immediately react that if something is not seeable, perceivable, not graspable, then it is not. The mind will say it doesn't exist. Don't become a victim of the mind. This sutra says beyond perception, beyond grasping, beyond not being. The mind will say that this is nothing, this cannot exist, this is a not being. Sutra says don't believe in it. There is something which is being, beyond not being, which exists and which cannot be perceived and which is not graspable. That is you. You cannot perceive yourself. Or can you? Can you imagine any situation in which you can encounter yourself? You can know yourself? We go on using the word self-knowledge, which is absolutely absurd. Because you cannot know the self. Self is always the knower. It cannot be reduced as a known. It cannot be reduced as an object. For example, if you think that you can know the self, then the self that you know will not be yourself. But one who is knowing the self will be the self. You will always remain the knower. You cannot become the known. You cannot put yourself in front of you. You will always recede back. Whatsoever you know cannot be yourself. This means that you cannot know it. The way you know other things, you cannot know it. The way I see you, I cannot see myself. Who will see? Because every relationship of knowledge, seeing, perception, means there are at least two things: the known and the knower. Self-knowledge is not possible in this sense, because there is only one. The knower and the known are one there. The observer and the observed are one. You cannot convert yourself into an object. So the word self-knowledge is just wrong. but it connotes something. It says something which is true. You can know yourself in a very different sense, in an altogether different sense than you know other things. When there is nothing to be known, all objects have disappeared. All that can be perceived and grasped is no more. You have discarded all. Suddenly, you become aware of yourself. And this awareness is not dual. There is no object and no subject. There is simply subjectivity.